The evening had started with such careful, quiet hope. 7 years of marriage felt like a milestone, something solid. People said the 7th anniversary was copper, for durability, for things that last. As Charles, adjusted the framed star chart on the dining table, lining it up perfectly with her plate, I thought about that. Copper was warm. It was reliable. It wasn't flashy, but it was strong. I looked around the room I had prepared. The meal was her favorite, a complicated recipe I'd spent the whole afternoon getting right. The wedding china was out, the good stuff we only used for the most important occasions, which seemed to be fewer and farther between these days. Candles flickered, soft music played, and the air smelled like herbs and slow-cooked meat. It was a scene from a movie about rekindling love. I had planned it all to be perfect, to remind her of us, of the story we began before it got buried under grocery lists and quiet evenings and a slow, steady drift I could feel but couldn't seem to stop. I wanted a spark. I needed a sign that we could find our way back from wherever we had lost the path. She came home later than I expected, but she'd texted, so I kept the food warm. She swept in, dropping her bag by the door, and gave me a quick, dry kiss on the cheek. Her eyes were already somewhere else. "This looks nice," she said, her voice pleasant but distant, the kind of tone you use when you compliment a coworker's new haircut. She sat down, and I poured the wine, a bottle I'd been saving. That's when I saw it. Her phone was face up on the tablecloth, right next to her fork. It was a silent, gleaming rectangle of polished glass, and almost immediately, it began to light up. Not with calls, but with a rapid, pulsing glow of notifications. I recognized the little icon from across the table. It was from that social media app, the one used by climbers and adventurers. She saw me looking. Instead of flipping the phone over, an apology in her eyes, she picked it up. A real smile, one I hadn't seen in months, touched her lips. "Oh," she said, her voice suddenly alive. "He's going live. This is the update from base camp." And just like that, the dinner, the candles, the star chart, we all vanished. What followed was a monologue. She narrated the live feed as if she were a sports commentator, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "He's starting the summit push a day early. Can you imagine the nerve? K2 without bottled oxygen. The sheer physical and mental strength that takes." She wasn't talking to me. She was talking at me, through me, to some idealized version of a listener who shared her fascination. She scrolled, her fingers dancing across the screen, pulling up photos, quoting his past posts about discipline and fear. She knew the details of this stranger's life, his training regimen, his diet, his favorite brand of gloves, with an intimacy that felt like a physical blow. I sat there, eating the food that now tasted like nothing, listening to her describe a man who conquered literal mountains for a living. And I thought about my own day, about the spreadsheets I had audited, the quarterly reports I had filed, the quiet, predictable order of my own life. The comparison wasn't spoken, but it screamed in the space between us, louder than any words. I waited. I waited for a natural pause that never came. The food grew cold on her plate as she swiped and narrated. Finally, I couldn't take the sound of her voice describing another person's life in my house, on our night. I put my fork down softly. I said, "It's our anniversary. Could the mountain wait? Just for an hour?" She looked up from the screen then. Her expression shifted from rapt attention to something else. First confusion, as if I had spoken in a foreign language, then a slow dawning pity. She took a deliberate sip of her wine, placed the glass down carefully, and smiled a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's be real," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, as if explaining something simple to a child. "You're just a placeholder. You're just here until someone with a real life, someone like him, comes along." The words didn't land with a shout or a slam. They were stated. A simple, accepted fact of the universe, like gravity or the time of sunset. She might as well have been commenting on the weather. A funny thing happened then. I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel my heart break. I felt a click. Deep inside my chest, it was like a heavy vault door sealed shut. All the love, the confusion, the years of trying, the slow burn of disappointment, they all got locked away in an instant. What rose to the surface was a terrifying calm. An analytical, quiet clarity. I simply nodded. I looked at my plate, picked up my fork, and finished my meal. I chewed slowly. I tasted every bland, overcooked bite. I drank my wine. I did not look at her. She seemed momentarily surprised by my reaction, then shrugged slightly and went back to her phone, her commentary now hushed, but no less enthusiastic. When I was done, I stood up. I cleared my plate. I cleared her untouched plate. I took them to the kitchen, rinsed them, and put them in the dishwasher. I moved methodically, my mind utterly silent. I was an automaton, executing a cleanup protocol. Later, lying in the dark beside her sleeping form, I didn't stare at the ceiling fighting tears. I felt like a forensic accountant brought in to audit a failed business. I took stock. The assets, my stability, my loyalty, my ability to provide a quiet, safe home. These had been on the books, but they had been severely undervalued, treated as liabilities of boredom. The liability, her contempt, her disinterest, her investment in a fantasy. That liability was now insurmountable. The business of our marriage was insolvent. The numbers didn't lie. The profit and loss statement showed years in the red. The emotional capital was gone. It was a clean, clinical realization devoid of pain. The pain was locked in the vault. All that was left was the problem to be solved. I got out of bed. The floor was cool under my feet. I walked to my home office, the neat, ordered space where I controlled variables for a living. I turned on the small desk lamp, its light a soft pool on the polished wood. I opened my laptop. I didn't open my work files. I opened a new, blank spreadsheet. At the top, in cell A1, I typed a title, Project Divorce. It wasn't a dramatic title. It was a project name like any other. Below it, I began to list headers. Assets, debts, timeline, legal considerations. Then, on a new tab, I created a different list. This one was not about us. It was about him. I titled that tab, James Thorne. I began to research. I found his foundation, his sponsorship deals, his public schedule. I learned about his newly launched environmental nonprofit. It was all very public, very heroic, very real. I zoomed in on a press release photo of him, this man with a windswept, rugged face and eyes that looked toward distant horizons. The man who had a real life. I felt nothing looking at him. No jealousy. No hatred. He was a variable. A data point. A key component in the equation that had just been presented to me. The final action of that night, as the first gray light of dawn touched the window, was me opening a new browser tab. I did not search for divorce lawyers. Not yet. Instead, I found the corporate donor page for James Thorne's foundation. I scrolled to the bottom, to a section titled Contact for Major Gifts. There was an email address there, a generic one for large donations and partnerships. I copied it. I pasted it into a blank document. I stared at it. A ghost of a smile, the first expression I'd felt since the vault door sealed, touched my lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who has just found the first thread of a very complex knot, and who knows, with absolute certainty, that he is going to pull it until the whole thing unravels. The chapter of my life, where I was a placeholder, was over. The audit was complete. The restructuring was about to begin. I closed the laptop. The room was silent. I had my plan. The only question that remained, humming in the new quiet of my mind, was a simple one. How far was I willing to go to prove my worth? People think accounting is about numbers. It's not. It's about finding the story the numbers hide. The numbers themselves are just clues. A strange withdrawal, a pattern of deposits, an invoice that doesn't match the service description. My job is to look at the dry, boring columns and see the truth, the embezzlement, the bad investment, the hidden liability. So in the cold, clear days after the anniversary dinner, I applied my professional skills to the most important audit of my life. I was auditing the ledger of my marriage, and the story the numbers told was a disaster. But I needed more than numbers. I needed the source documents. I started with the house. She was out a lot now, walking around with a new energy, talking about manifesting change and new vibrations. It made it easy. Her old home office was mostly a storage room now, filled with boxes of college things and seasonal decor. I had never had a reason to poke around. Now I had the best reason. I was looking for evidence. I found the trunk in the back corner, under an old blanket. It was a small, sturdy footlocker, the kind you see in old movies. It was locked with a simple padlock. I didn't force it. I went to her jewelry box on her dresser. Among the necklaces and earrings, in a little ceramic dish meant for rings, was a small, tarnished key. It fit. The lock clicked open. Inside, I didn't find old letters from an ex-boyfriend. What I found was a shrine. It wasn't just a few magazine cutouts. There were professional climber posters, carefully taped to the inside of the lid. There was a faded, pressed flower glued to a note card with a date and a location I recognized from a famous climb. But the real story was in the journals. 3 of them with floral covers, the kind teenage girls use. I sat on the dusty floor and opened the first one. The entry started when she was 15. They were addressed directly to him, to the climber. They were full of adolescent yearning, about how his bravery inspired her, how she dreamed of a life of adventure. That was normal fangirl stuff, maybe. But the second journal, from her late teens, was different. It detailed her life plan. It listed qualities she wanted in a husband: stable, responsible, a good provider. And at the end of that list, in bubbly handwriting, it said, "And this will be good until I can meet someone like my true inspiration, until my real life with someone like him can begin." The third journal petered out in her early 20s, around the time we met. The final entry read, "It's time to be practical. Charles is stable. He's kind. He's a safe choice. The dream was a fantasy. This is real life." Reading those words, sitting in that dusty room, I felt no hot rush of jealousy. I felt a cold, clinical pity. She hadn't just married me. She had married a demographic. A safe harbor. A placeholder, just like she said. The ledger of her heart showed a massive, long-term investment in a fantasy, and a small, pragmatic, and ultimately resentful investment in the reality that was me. The audit was confirming the initial assessment. The business was built on a faulty premise. This clarity was my weapon. At my actual job, I became a machine of focus. I used my skills to dive into the only numbers that mattered now. His. James Thorne's foundation was new and shiny, a nonprofit set up to fund environmental research linked to his expeditions. It was perfect for him. It made his dangerous hobby look noble, scientific. I pulled their publicly available tax forms, their annual reports, their press releases about corporate partnerships. My trained eye saw the story the glossy brochures hid. The foundation was a public relations success, but an operational mess. They had big, flashy pledges from companies, but the actual cash flow was shaky. They spent a fortune on marketing and filmmaker salaries for their documentaries. Their funding for the actual science part was thin, promised on future donations that might not come. It was a house of cards built on the brand of one man. I saw a weakness, a liability waiting to happen. They needed a big, unrestricted cash injection to stabilize everything, to fund his next big, headline-grabbing trip. They needed a hero off the mountain, a financial white knight. So I became one. I created a new email address, something professional and bland. I created a simple logo for a fake corporate consulting firm, one that invested in impactful narratives. I drafted an email. It was a masterpiece of professional manipulation. I wrote to the generic donor email address I had stared at that first night. I introduced my fake company as admirers of bold, visionary work. I proposed a significant, multi-year strategic donation to underwrite Thorne's next major expedition. I framed it not as a gift, but as a sponsorship for vital climate data collection. I attached a formal term sheet, full of legalistic language about deliverables and reporting. It looked completely legitimate. The hook, the number that would make them ignore minor doubts, was the amount. I proposed a donation with 6 zeros. $100,000 as an initial good faith deposit, with more to follow. It was a number that solves a lot of problems for a cash-strapped nonprofit. It was a number that makes people listen. Before I hit send, I hesitated. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was the moment. Up until now, it had been planning, research, a reaction to a deep hurt. This was an action. This was the first move in a game I had never wanted to play. This wasn't just about getting a divorce anymore. This was a targeted strike. I thought of her face at the dinner table, lit by her phone's glow, her voice full of passion for a stranger. I thought of the pity in her eyes when she called me a placeholder. The coldness in the vault of my chest solidified. The hesitation died. I clicked send. The email vanished from my outbox. The move was made. Now I had to wait. I didn't have to wait long. The reply came not the next day, but later that same afternoon. It wasn't from the generic address. It was from a personal assistant, someone with a real name and a direct line to the man himself. The email was effusive. The mountaineer was intrigued and deeply grateful for our proposal. He was inspired by our shared vision. He wanted to schedule a video call to discuss values and alignment. My fake company had passed the first sniff test. I wrote back, agreeing, and set up a new virtual meeting space with a generic business background. I bought a simple voice modulator software, something that would subtly change my tone, make me sound a bit older, a bit more gravelly. I wasn't going to be Charles, the scorned husband. I was going to be a representative of a shadowy benefactor. The day of the call, I sat in my home office at a time I knew she would be out. I put on a plain black headset. I activated the voice modulator. When the video link connected, I kept my camera off. On my screen, I saw two people. One was a young, eager woman, the assistant. The other was him, James Thorne. He looked younger than in his press photos, but with more tired lines around his eyes. He was wearing a simple fleece jacket. He smiled a practiced, camera-ready smile. "Thank you for taking the time," he began, his voice exactly as it sounded in interviews, warm and confident. "We're so excited about your interest in the Foundation's work." We went through the pleasantries. The assistant did most of the talking. Then I spoke, my altered voice sounding strange even to me. I kept it brief. I talked about my fake company's desire to be part of a legacy, not just write a check. I reiterated the sponsorship angle, the climate data narrative. He nodded along, his eyes bright. I could see him calculating, not just the science, but the press coverage, the credibility a major corporate sponsor would bring. Then I dropped the next part of the bait. "Our brand believes in impactful narratives," my robotic voice said. "The donation is conditional on a unique, joint public awareness event. Something that connects your hands-on work directly with our commitment. We'd like to help you make a personal delivery, so to speak, to a key supporter." The man on the screen, the adventurer used to strange requests from wealthy fans, leaned forward. He was hooked. He loved the phrase, impactful narrative. He saw a photo op, a story. "I love that," he said, his smile genuine now. "Getting out from behind the desk, making it personal. That's what it's all about." We talked dates, vague locations. I said my team would handle all the specifics. All he had to do was show up and be himself. He agreed. The call ended with promises of contracts being sent. The contracts came. My fake legal entity, created with some online paperwork and a rented mailbox, was now in a formal agreement with James Thorne's foundation. I read every line. It was all standard until the final page. There was a special clause, Clause 7B, that my fabricated lawyer had inserted. It read, "The benefactor reserves the right to specify one individual to receive a commemorative, hand-delivered token of the partnership at a mutually agreed public event." In the margin of the PDF, next to that clause, was a comment. It was from his email. He had written, "A bit odd, but if it's for a superfan, I'm happy to make their day. Approved." I stared at that comment. He had signed off on it. He had approved his own role in what was to come, thinking he was making a dream come true for some anonymous admirer. The irony was so perfect, it was almost beautiful. He had no idea who the fan really was, or what dream was about to be delivered. I signed the agreement electronically from my fake company. The deal was done. I wasn't just buying a donation. I was buying the man's time, his presence, his signature smile. I was purchasing the central prop for the final act of my marriage. The forensic audit was complete. The fantasy had been quantified. And now I had just funded it. Revenge is not a dish best served cold. That is a saying for amateurs. Real revenge is a dish that requires a master chef, a precise recipe, and a dining room full of the right audience. I was done being the appliance she used to warm up her life. The main ingredient for my recipe, the climber, was secured. But I couldn't deliver the papers myself. That would be messy, emotional, and give her the satisfaction of a scene. I needed a professional. A standard process server would not do. I needed someone with theatricality, someone who could deliver lines without a flicker of emotion, someone who understood that this was not just a delivery but a performance. My research led me to a niche agency. Their website was vague, but the keywords were clear: high stakes, discretion, celebrity-adjacent services. I made the call. The woman who answered had a voice like smooth stone. Her name was Gwen. We met in person at her office, which looked more like a minimalist apartment. She was in her 50s, with severe gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened as I laid out the situation. I did not mention the climber at first. I just said I needed my wife served with divorce papers in a specific, public location, and that it needed to be done with a certain flair. She nodded, taking notes. "I have people who specialize in high-profile deliveries," she said. "But flair costs extra. What specifically did you have in mind?" That is when I told her about the other part of the delivery. About him. Her pen stopped. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "You want to involve a third-party public figure in the service of legal documents," she stated, not asked. "Yes," I said. "He will be there. He will be part of the scene. He thinks it is a promotional event for a fan." For the first time, I saw a flicker in her stone-like composure. It was not judgment. It was assessment, like a mechanic looking at a complex engine. That is a logistical complication, she said. It raises the risk of a scene, of interference, of legal blowback on my operative. My fee for that is 5 times the standard rate. Half up front, non-refundable. I did not blink. Agreed. She named a number that was staggering. I took out my checkbook and wrote it, liquidating what was left of a personal investment account. The money felt insignificant. It was the cost of a transaction, and the thing I was buying was my self-respect. After I handed her the check, she leaned back. All right, Mr. Charles. Let us talk about the script. The rehearsal felt like planning a military operation. We met in a private back room of a law library, a place of whispers and old paper. I handed Gwen the thick envelope containing the divorce papers, filed by a lawyer I had retained quietly the week before. The reason cited was the standard, irreconcilable differences. I almost asked him to add an addendum. Plaintiff no longer wishes to be a supporting character in defendant's autobiography. But I kept it simple. Then I handed her a second, smaller, cream-colored envelope. You will give her this immediately after the papers, I instructed. Do not let her refuse it. Gwen took it, opened the flap, and pulled out the single sheet inside. It was a printed copy of the quote from our anniversary dinner. I had copied it in a plain font. At the bottom, in my own handwriting, I had added one line. The placeholder has relocated. Best of luck with the real thing. Gwen read it. Her eyes moved from the printed words to my handwritten postscript. She looked back at me. No smile, no frown. Theatrical, she said. Cruel. I will need an additional fee for handling supplementary non-legal materials. It changes the nature of the interaction. I nodded again. Worth every penny. She placed the note back into its envelope carefully, as if it were evidence. Next came the logistics of humiliation. I needed the perfect stage. I began to track my wife's social calendar discreetly. It was not hard. She was a creature of habit and performance. I learned she had a standing weekly brunch with her closest friends at a hyper-trendy cafe downtown. The place was called the Glass House, and it was famous for its floor-to-ceiling windows, its expensive avocado toast, and its clientele who went there to see and be seen. It was the perfect venue. It was where she performed her ideal self, the adventurous, vibrant woman trapped in a boring marriage, sharing stories and manifesting her new energy. The date was set for a Saturday. I confirmed with the climber's assistant that he would be in the city that weekend for a speaking engagement. It was all falling into place. The final briefing was a conference call. It was me on a blocked number, Gwen on a secure line, and a thoroughly confused but professionally polite James Thorne. He thought this was a quirky, last-minute PR stunt organized by his new corporate sponsor. So just to clarify, his voice came through, cheerful but hesitant. I am meeting a superfan at a cafe, and your associate will be there. That is correct, Mr. Thorne, Gwen said, her voice now in full professional mode, crisp and reassuring. The fan is a woman named Chloe. She will be overjoyed and surprised. Your role is to smile, be your inspiring self, and perhaps sign a poster. My role is to handle the formal presentation of the commemorative gift from our mutual benefactor. Just follow my lead. There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear him shrugging. He was used to the eccentric requests of wealthy donors. Okay, sure, he said. Sounds fun. Make a fan's day. I am in. Excellent, Gwen said. We will meet you outside the venue at 11:45 sharp. The call ended. The pieces were on the board. The morning of the brunch, I dressed not for a showdown, but for a board meeting. A crisp, simple shirt, dark trousers. I looked at myself in the mirror of my new, barely furnished apartment. I saw the man she had called boring. But I did not see boring anymore. I saw calm. I saw focused power. I saw an accountant who had balanced the most important equation of his life. My phone, a new burner phone I used only for this operation, buzzed. A text from Gwen. It read, Asset and package in transit. ETA to venue 30 minutes. Awaiting green light. I looked at the clock. I knew from social media posts that my wife and her friends were already seated at their usual table by the window, mimosas in hand. I could picture her laughing, gesturing broadly, holding court. I texted back one word, proceed. I left my apartment and got into a hired car I had waiting. The driver was a quiet man I had paid to simply wait and drive. We parked across the street from the Glass House, with a clear view of the entrance and the window-lined front. I raised a small pair of binoculars. I found her immediately. She was at a round table near the window, surrounded by 3 of her friends. She was in the middle of a story, one hand holding her mimosa glass, the other tracing shapes in the air. She threw her head back and laughed. I could read her lips from my distance. She was saying, just manifesting a new energy. Someone who really lives, you know. Her friends nodded, sipping their drinks, enraptured by her performance. She was the star of her own show, and today, I was the director. Right on schedule, at 11:45, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb in front of the cafe. The passenger door opened, and James Thorne stepped out. He was dressed in a stylish, expensive-looking outdoor jacket, clean jeans, and boots. He looked every bit the part of the casual adventurer. He ran a hand through his hair, put on his public smile, and checked his reflection in the window of the SUV. Gwen emerged from the other side. She was in a sharp, dark pantsuit, her hair in a tight bun. She carried a slim, professional-looking leather portfolio. She said something to Thorne, and he nodded. Together, they walked toward the entrance of the glass house. A few people on the sidewalk did a double take, recognizing the famous face. A buzz went through the visible patrons inside the cafe. Heads turned. I watched through the binoculars, my breath even. The manager of the cafe, a young man in an apron, hurried over as they entered, his face a mix of confusion and recognition. Thorne waved him away with a practiced, friendly gesture, his eyes scanning the room as Gwen had instructed him. He spotted the table by the window. He saw my wife. A genuine, wider smile spread across his face. He began walking directly toward her. My wife's spoon, which had been hovering over her avocado toast, clattered onto her plate. All the color drained from her face, leaving her pale as paper. Then, in a rush, it flooded back, a crimson wave of shock and utter, starstruck delight. Her mouth fell open slightly. Her friends stared, first at the approaching celebrity, then at her, their expressions comical in their surprise. He reached the table. "Chloe," he said, his voice warm and projecting just enough to be heard at nearby tables. "I have heard so much about you." For 3 glorious seconds, my wife's wildest dream came true. Her hero was saying her name, in public, surrounded by her friends. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She looked at her friends as if to say, "See? This is the life I am meant for." It was the peak of her fantasy, and it was all about to shatter. Watching from the car across the street, I realized there are 2 types of earthquakes. There are the ones that tear the ground apart, and there are the ones that happen in perfect stillness on a human face. I was there to witness both. The scene inside the glass-walled cafe was like a silent movie from my vantage point. I saw the famous climber smile and speak to my wife. I saw her hand fly to her chest, her face transforming from shock into a radiant, disbelieving joy. She stood up quickly, almost knocking her chair over. Her friends were frozen, their eyes wide as plates, looking from her to the celebrity and back again. This was the moment she had dreamed of since she was a teenager writing in those journals. This was the proof that her fantasy was real, that the universe was finally delivering the exciting life she deserved. The climber, ever the performer, gestured graciously to Gwen, who stood a respectful step behind him, her face a mask of polite neutrality. He said something else, probably a line about being happy to meet a dedicated supporter. My wife nodded, her smile so wide it looked like it might hurt. She was in the spotlight. And then, with the precision of a surgeon making an incision, Gwen stepped forward. She did not hand over a poster or a book to sign. She opened the leather portfolio she was carrying. Her mouth moved, speaking words I could not hear but had written myself. The change in the air was instant, even from across the street. The radiant joy on my wife's face did not fade slowly. It shattered. It was like watching a glass bowl hit a stone floor. Her smile vanished, replaced by a blank, uncomprehending stare. Her eyes dropped from the climber's face to the portfolio in Gwen's hands. Gwen was holding out a thick, legal-sized envelope. She placed it deliberately on the cafe table, right on top of my wife's half-eaten avocado toast. The climber's own smile faltered. He looked from the envelope to Gwen's impassive face, then back to my wife, whose expression was curdling into something else entirely. He took an instinctive half-step back, his celebrity charm evaporating, replaced by the confusion of a man who realizes he is not in a PR stunt, but in something he does not understand. Gwen's voice, though I could not hear it, was clearly crisp and carried perfectly in the now quiet cafe. Every patron was watching. Every friend was staring. I saw her lips form the legally required words. I saw her then place the second, smaller cream-colored envelope neatly on top of the legal papers. She gave a slight, professional nod. Her job was done. The climber was now visibly uncomfortable. He leaned in, said a few short words to my wife, probably an apology, a quick, "I had no idea." And then he turned on his heel. He walked out of the cafe with a speed that was just short of a run, pushing past the confused manager, and disappeared into the back seat of the waiting SUV. Gwen followed at a more measured pace, without a backward glance. The black SUV pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic, leaving behind the wreckage. Inside, the performance was over. The stage was left with its main actor in ruins. My wife did not move. She stared down at the 2 envelopes on her plate. One of her friends reached out a hand to touch her arm, but she jerked away as if burned. Her body was rigid. Then, slowly, she sank back into her chair. She folded in on herself, her shoulders hunching. She was not crying. She seemed to be imploding, collapsing inward under the weight of a public humiliation so complete, so meticulously crafted, that it would be impossible to ever explain away. Her friends were talking rapidly, their faces a mix of shock and a kind of morbid fascination. One of them picked up the smaller envelope, but my wife snatched it from her hand. Her fingers trembled violently as she tore it open. She pulled out the single sheet of paper. From my distance, I could see the moment her eyes found my handwritten line at the bottom. Her head snapped up. Her eyes, wide with a dawning cataclysmic horror, scanned the street outside the glass wall. They darted from car to car, from shadow to shadow, searching. She was looking for me. She knew. She knew exactly who had done this, and she knew it was not an act of spontaneous anger. This was a calculated strike. This was the work of the placeholder. My own phone, the real one she knew about, began to vibrate in my pocket. Not a call, but a rapid, relentless series of text message alerts. Then it started ringing. I ignored it. I kept watching. I saw her finally stand up, leaving the papers and the torn envelope on the table. She did not run. She walked out of the cafe with the stiff, deliberate gait of someone in profound shock, like a robot with broken programming. Her friends scrambled after her, gathering purses and throwing cash on the table, but she was already out the door, turning blindly down the sidewalk, her destination unclear. The controlled experiment was over. The variables were now loose in the world. I tapped the driver's shoulder. "We can go." As we pulled away, I allowed myself one last look. One of her friends had remained outside the cafe, staring directly at my parked car. She was on her phone, pointing right at us. I could not hear her, but I could read the furious anger on her lips. The first wave of backlash had a target. It did not matter. The deed was done. I felt a strange emptiness where I had expected a surge of victory. There was no elation, no sense of relief. Just a vast, quiet space. The placeholder had executed his function perfectly and was now decommissioned. My burner phone buzzed. A text from Gwen. It read, "Package delivered. Asset extracted. Scene contained. Final invoice to follow." The clinical language comforted me. This had been a transaction, and it was now complete. I had the driver take me to my new apartment, a small, modern space I had leased under my own name weeks ago in preparation for this day. It was bare with just a bed, a table, and a few boxes of my clothes. It was a blank slate. As I unlocked the door and stepped into the emptiness, my personal phone started ringing again. It was a call from an unknown number, but with a familiar area code from her hometown. I answered. It was my father-in-law's voice. It was tight, strained, a controlled fury simmering just under the surface that I had never heard before. "You need to explain yourself," he said, each word clipped and hard. "Right now. What in God's name have you done?" I did not say anything for a moment. I looked around my new, empty apartment, the walls echoing with nothing. "There is nothing to explain," I said, my own voice calm and flat. "The papers explain it all. Goodbye." I ended the call and turned the phone off. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The hook was set. The performance was over. But as the adrenaline faded, a single question began to form in the new quiet of my mind. I had proven my point in the most devastating way possible. I had shown I was not just a passive fixture. But what happens when the person you have humiliated is not just a stranger, but someone who knows all your weak spots, and who now has nothing left to lose? The game was not over. The first move was mine. The next move would be hers. The days after the cafe were like living inside a beehive that had been kicked. A constant, angry buzzing surrounded me, but I was sealed off in the center, motionless. My personal phone, once I turned it back on, was a disaster zone of missed calls and texts. They came from her friends, from her sister. The messages ran the gamut from raw, screaming anger to wounded, pleading confusion. I did not read most of them. I deleted them in batches. The ones from her were different. They were short, sharp, and toxic. "You pathetic monster. You will pay for this. I will ruin you." I saved those. They were data points. My father-in-law did not call again. The first direct strike came at my office. I was trying to bury myself in work, in the clean, predictable world of numbers, when my receptionist's nervous voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Charles, your wife's family is here. They are in the lobby. They are insisting on seeing you." I knew what this was. It was a siege. They had chosen the battlefield of my professional life, a place where I could not easily hide or escape. I took a deep breath, smoothed my tie, and walked out to the lobby. They stood there like a wall of accusatory fury. Her father, her mother, and her sister. Her father's face was a thundercloud. Her mother's eyes were red-rimmed. Her sister just glared at me with pure hatred. "We need to talk. Now," her father said, his voice low and dangerous in the quiet corporate space. My colleagues were pretending not to stare from their cubicles. "We can talk in the small conference room," I said, keeping my voice level. I led them to a sterile, windowless room used for client meetings. The moment the door closed, the storm broke. "What the hell was that?" her father exploded, his controlled fury from the phone call now unleashed. "A public spectacle? Humiliating her like that? Using some celebrity to do your dirty work? I thought you were a stand-up guy. Stable. This is the act of a pathetic, cowardly worm." The word stable hit me like a physical blow. It was the same word, the same currency I had been valued for and then despised for. It was the core of the placeholder accusation. "She told you what she said to me, I assume?" I asked, still calm. "She said you twisted a private conversation," her mother cried, her voice trembling. "That you took things out of context to justify this cruel theater." "There was no context that would make what she said acceptable," I replied. "She ended our marriage. I just finalized it." Her sister stepped forward, her finger jabbing the air near my face. "You destroyed her. For a comment? Do you have any idea what you've done? She's a wreck. You broke her." I looked at the three of them, these people I had shared holidays with for 7 years. They only had one side of the story, a story where she was the blameless victim of a psychotic husband. They did not have the years of disinterest, the anniversary dinner, the journals in the trunk. They had the performance, and now they had the dramatic fallout. "The legal process will handle everything from here," I said. "You should direct your concerns to her lawyer. This meeting is over." I walked out of the conference room, leaving them standing there. I went back to my desk, but the buzzing had infiltrated the office. The looks from my co-workers were longer, more curious. Whispers followed me to the coffee machine. The next wave was digital. Her sister, always the most dramatic, took to social media. She did not name me, but the clues were obvious to anyone in our circle. She posted a long, emotional story about watching someone you love be publicly eviscerated by a coward who couldn't face her like a man. She used hashtags like #karmaiscoming and #psychological abuse. Her friends and my wife's friends rallied in the comments, a chorus of support and shared outrage. They were building a narrative, and in that narrative, I was the villain. My own social media, which I rarely used, became a ghost town. A few old friends from college sent me cautious, private messages asking if I was okay, but most people simply vanished, choosing to avoid the drama. My social circle, never huge to begin with, evaporated overnight. The quiet in my new apartment was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet of isolation. Then my lawyer called. Her lawyer had made formal contact. The initial talk was not about a settlement. It was aggressive. They were exploring grounds for a restraining order based on the harassing and threatening nature of the service of process. They were talking about a civil claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress due to the theatrical and malicious method I had chosen. They were not just fighting a divorce. They were trying to frame my revenge as an actionable offense, a crime. They were going for my throat, trying to paint me as unstable and dangerous. "They're setting the stage," my lawyer said, his voice grim over the phone. "If they can get a judge to see you as a malicious actor, it changes everything. It could affect asset division, spousal support, everything. They want you on the defensive." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was not part of my spreadsheet. I had accounted for anger, for a messy split, but not for a full-scale legal counterattack that aimed to criminalize my actions. The final piece of fallout came from an unexpected direction. A minor celebrity gossip website picked up a thread. Someone who had been in the cafe that day had posted a blurry photo online, wondering what the weird scene with the famous climber was about. The gossip columnist connected a few dots, mentioning the climber's recent, vague social media post about strange days and a misunderstanding with a fan. The story was headlined, "Adventure Star in Bizarre Cafe Encounter with Mystery Process Server?" It was small, seedy, and just weird enough to tarnish the edges of his clean-cut, heroic brand. I had not wanted to destroy him, just use him. But my actions had unintended shrapnel, and it was hitting people I barely knew. That night, back in my bare apartment, I tried to tally the costs so far. I had my moment in the cafe. I had made my statement. But since then, I had lost the goodwill of her family. I was watching my reputation be dismantled online. I was facing a scary legal fight that could cost me a fortune. And I had accidentally dragged an innocent man into a tabloid story. The placeholder had removed himself from the board, but the game had gotten bigger, messier, and more dangerous. I had wanted to prove I was not boring. I had succeeded. My life was now a sprawling, chaotic, dramatic saga, and it was profoundly, exhaustingly miserable. I sat at my cheap table and opened my laptop. I looked at the Project Divorce spreadsheet. The tab labeled James Thorne seemed to pulse on the screen. A new question, practical and urgent, pushed aside all the emotional noise. Her lawyers were coming for me. What did I have, what did I know that I could use to defend myself? The climber was a liability now, but was he also a potential asset? He had been humiliated too. What did he want? The war was no longer just between me and my wife. It had grown, and I needed to understand the whole battlefield if I was going to survive it. The legal battle shifted from a distant threat to a daily grind. My lawyer, a serious man named Mr. Evans, began preparing me for what he called the next phase of escalation. The first major event was my deposition. This is where her lawyers would get to ask me questions under oath, with a court reporter writing down every word. Mr. Evans warned me, their entire goal will be to provoke you. They want you to get angry, to slip up, to admit that the service was about cruelty and revenge, not about efficiency. They need to paint you as malicious. You must be a stone. You answer only the question asked. You do not explain. You do not elaborate. You are calm, you are factual, and you are boring. We practiced for hours. He would fire questions at me in his office. Why did you choose James Thorne to be present? My rehearsed answer. It was a matter of logistical efficiency. He was scheduled to be in the city that day, and his participation was part of a pre-existing agreement with a corporate entity. Is it efficient to hire a specialized, expensive process server and orchestrate a public spectacle? The method guaranteed she would personally receive the documents in a timely manner, avoiding potential delays or claims of non-receipt. The answers were true in a twisted technical way, but they sounded cold and calculating. That was the point. I was to become the unfeeling accountant, even in this. The day of the deposition arrived. It was held in a bland office building downtown, in a room that smelled of old coffee and lemon-scented cleaner. Across the table sat her lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My wife was not there, which was a small mercy. The court reporter sat poised, her fingers on the machine. Mr. Evans was next to me. Her lawyer began with soft, almost friendly questions, lulling me into a rhythm. Then he slowly tightened the screws. Do you often use celebrities to deliver legal documents, Mr. Charles? No. So this was a unique approach? Yes. Inspired by your wife's interests, perhaps? It was inspired by efficiency. He leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. Efficiency. So the choice of a famous mountaineer, a man your wife admired at her favorite brunch spot, in front of her friends. That was all just a happy coincidence for efficiency's sake? I kept my face blank. The location and the individual were selected based on availability and a high probability of direct contact. The lawyer's eyes gleamed. He didn't like my robotic answers. He wanted a performance, a breakdown. He pushed harder, asking about my feelings, about the note I had included, about my intentions. Each time, I gave him the same monotone, procedural response. I saw the frustration growing in him. They needed a villain, and I was refusing to put on the costume. The deposition ended after 2 hours. As we were packing up, her lawyer approached me in the hallway. He gave me that cold, fake smile. You know, for a boring accountant, you put on quite a show at that cafe. But the encore is always where they get the billing wrong. It was a threat, wrapped in what sounded like a compliment. Mr. Evans just guided me away. You did well, he muttered. But they're not done. They're going to keep coming. And they did. The legal fees began to mount, each month's statement from Mr. Evans a fresh shock. $5,000 for motion drafting, $3,000 for research, $10,000 for the deposition preparation and attendance. The numbers were staggering. The stable accountant's savings, the bedrock of the boring life she had scorned, were being rapidly eroded by the very drama she had claimed to crave. Every motion they filed, we had to counter. Every accusation required a detailed, costly response. It was a war of attrition, and the battlefield was my bank account. Socially, I was now a ghost. The few mutual friends who had been on the fence now clearly chose her side. The narrative of the publicly scorned wife was too powerful, too emotionally compelling. My quiet hurt could not compete with her loud, performative suffering. I stopped getting invitations to anything. My phone stayed quiet. The isolation in my apartment was complete. I would come home from work, eat a simple meal alone, and stare at the walls or at legal documents. The grand revenge had given me a moment of power, but it had cost me my entire world. I began to realize she was thriving in a new role, the martyr. The woman wronged by a cruel, calculating monster. She was receiving an outpouring of support and sympathy she had never gotten as my wife. Her adventure was now a crusade against me, and people were rallying to her cause. The pressure reached a breaking point when Mr. Evans presented me with a settlement offer from her side. It was brutal. She would get the house, free and clear. I would pay her a hefty amount of alimony every month for 5 years, and she would get 70% of our remaining investment accounts. It was a complete surrender. To sign it would be financial suicide, setting me back a decade or more. But to continue fighting meant a slow, expensive bleed, with no guarantee of a better outcome. The peace of surrender, of just making it all stop, whispered to me seductively. I was so tired. I told Mr. Evans I needed to think about it. That night, as I was poring over the brutal settlement terms, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "We need to talk. It's about your wife's legal strategy. I have information. Meet me tomorrow at the storage unit facility on East 80th, Unit 114. Noon. Come alone." It was unsigned. My first thought was that it was a trap, maybe from her aggressive friend. But the mention of legal strategy felt specific. Against my better judgment, and driven by a desperate need for any advantage, I decided to go. The next day, I took a long lunch break and drove to the edge of town. The storage facility was a sprawling place of rolling metal doors. I found Unit 114. The door was already rolled up about halfway. Cautiously, I ducked under it. Inside, under the glare of a single hanging bulb, was Gwen, the process server. She was standing beside a stack of cardboard boxes that were not mine. She looked the same, severe, professional, unreadable. "You," I said, surprised. "I thought you were done." The invoice was paid. "My services include post-operative consultation," she said dryly, "and ongoing intelligence for a continued fee. I heard through my network that your wife's legal team is digging. They have hired a private investigator. They are subpoenaing your bank records from the last 5 years, not just joint accounts, your personal ones too." My blood ran cold. "Why? What are they looking for?" "They are looking for hidden assets," Gwen stated. "They think the donation you orchestrated to the Climbers Foundation was a fraudulent transfer. They are going to argue you deliberately wasted a large sum of marital money to deprive her of her share. They're calling it a concealment of assets. If they prove that, a judge could award her even more to compensate. They are not just going for your throat financially. They're going for your lungs and your liver." The cold knot in my stomach turned to ice. This was worse than I imagined. They were trying to turn my revenge into a financial crime. "What can I do?" I asked. Gwen looked at the boxes. "These are hers. From your old house. She put them here when she moved some things out. The private investigator was here yesterday, going through them, looking for anything that could help her case. I have access to the facility logs." She patted one of the boxes. "I suggest you conduct your own audit. You are good at that. Look for your own evidence. There might be something here that helps you. A ledger, perhaps, that shows her own financial behavior." She handed me a pair of latex gloves. "My continued fee is the same as the initial service. Half now. I will keep monitoring their movements." I didn't hesitate. I wrote her another check. I was spending a fortune to fight a fortune, a self-feeding cycle of destruction. After she left, I put on the gloves and opened the first box. It was mostly old books and knickknacks. The second box was labeled memorabilia. I felt a jolt when I opened it. On top was a familiar floral journal, one of the ones from the trunk. I opened it, but beneath it, buried under old concert tickets and photos, was something else. A slim, dark blue bank book. It was for an account at a local credit union. An account in her name only. I flipped it open. The transactions were small but regular. Monthly deposits of a few $100s, transferred from what I recognized as her personal checking account, the one her paycheck went into, and matching monthly withdrawals sent to an outfit called Summit Dreams Travel. The dates went back 2 years. She had been saving. She had been planning. And she had been using money that, while technically hers, was part of our marital financial ecosystem to fund a separate, secret life. This was not just a fantasy. This was a financial plan for an exit. I took photos of every page with my phone. As I was driving back to the office, my mind racing with the legal implications of this discovery, my car was suddenly rammed from behind at a red light. It wasn't a hard crash, but a sharp, deliberate bump. My head snapped forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw the driver. It was her male friend, the one who had always been overly familiar, the one who had sent her money. He glared at me, made a slashing motion across his own throat, and then sped away, running the red light. The message was clear. The war was no longer just in courtrooms and spreadsheets. It was here on the street, and I was running out of safe ground. Revenge is a chain reaction. You imagine it as a single, brilliant explosion. You forget about the shockwave, the fallout, the secondary fires you never meant to start. The hidden bank book was a game changer. I sat with Mr. Evans, my lawyer, and showed him the photos. His professional calm cracked for a second, and a real, sharp smile appeared. "This," he said, tapping my phone screen, "is what we call a hidden marital asset. This is a very big deal. She was diverting marital funds into a separate account for a personal purpose without your knowledge. This completely undercuts her narrative of being a blameless victim. This turns her from the wounded party into a scheming partner. We need to get this into the formal discovery process immediately." He drafted a harshly worded letter to her lawyer, demanding full disclosure of all secret accounts and threatening sanctions for discovery fraud. The tone of the war shifted overnight. The aggressive motions from her side slowed. The public social media campaign from her sister went quiet. The constant buzzing pressure let up just a little. It felt like we had finally aimed the spotlight back at her, and she didn't like what it revealed. But the fallout was still spreading. The climber, James Thorne, was having his own problems. The gossip item about the cafe had planted a seed. An anonymous tip, sent from a brand new email account I definitely did not create, led a financial blogger who specialized in nonprofit scrutiny to take a closer look at Thorne's foundation. The blogger wrote a long piece questioning the foundation's accounting practices, the high administrative costs, and the mysterious, large donation from a shell corporation that had suddenly vanished. The words financial irregularities and transparency issues were used. It wasn't a scandal, but it was a dark cloud. Thorne's pristine, heroic image got its first real smear of mud. His brand, built on purity and adventure, was now associated with something seedy and confusing. I read the article with a mix of satisfaction and guilt. I hadn't wanted to destroy him, just use him. But my actions had consequences I couldn't control. He was collateral damage in my personal war, and seeing his name dragged through the mud felt like watching a building I had only meant to graze start to crumble. The effect on my wife was more profound. I heard this through a single, neutral mutual friend who called me concerned. "I saw her yesterday," the friend said, her voice hushed. "She's different. It's not just the divorce. She saw the articles about him, about his foundation. It broke something in her. She always talked about him like he was this perfect, untouchable ideal. Now he's just another guy with money problems and bad publicity. I think losing the fantasy hurt her more than losing you, if that's possible." The friend was apologetic, but the message was clear. The psychological escape hatch she had relied on for years, the fantasy that had sustained her contempt for our ordinary life, had been welded shut. I had not just divorced her, I had obliterated her sanctuary. Gwen, my unexpected ally, continued her reports. She confirmed that the private investigator had stopped his digging into my finances. Her lawyer had gone radio silent. "They are regrouping," Gwen said over a secure call. "Your disclosure of the secret account put them on the defensive. But do not get comfortable. They are not the type to surrender. They will look for a new angle. My advice? Use the momentum. Push for a settlement now, while you have the upper hand. The longer this drags on, the more chances they have to find a weakness. I agreed. I told Mr. Evans to draw up a settlement proposal from our side. A fair one based on a true 50-50 split of all known assets, with the house being sold and the proceeds divided. No alimony. A clean break. It was a good offer, a peace offering from a position of strength. Before we could even send it, another piece of fallout landed in my lap. A formal, stiffly worded letter arrived from the lawyers representing James Thorne's foundation. It was addressed to my fake corporate entity, but Gwen forwarded it to me. The letter stated that, due to the cloud of uncertainty surrounding the origin and intent of the initial donation, and in light of recent public narratives, the Foundation's board had voted unanimously to return the initial good faith deposit. They were invoking a standard morals clause in the contract. A check was enclosed. They were giving the money back. The $100,000 was coming back to my fake company's bank account. On the surface, this was good. It removed the wasted marital asset argument completely. But it also created a new problem. That money was now a flagged, tainted asset. It was a sum of cash that had gone from me to him and back to me, all in the middle of a vicious divorce. If her lawyers found out about it, and they would, because the return would likely show up in the Foundation's public records, they could argue it was still a marital asset being hidden in a shell corporation. The money was hot, and I was holding it. I met with Mr. Evans again. This complicates things, he admitted, rubbing his temples. We have to disclose the existence of the corporate entity and the returned funds in our next financial disclosure to the court. If we don't, and they find out, it looks like we're continuing to hide assets. But if we do, it opens up a whole new line of questioning about your actions, your intent. It could refocus the case on your behavior all over again. It felt like a trap. Every move I made to protect myself created a new vulnerability. I was playing a game of legal whack-a-mole, and I was getting tired. That evening, I got a call on my personal phone from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, expecting another angry relative. "Is this Mr. Charles?" a man's voice asked. It was tense, but trying to be polite. "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is James Thorne." The voice was unmistakable, the same one from the video call, but stripped of its confident, media-ready warmth. It was just a man, and he sounded tired and pissed off. "I need to talk to you. Not through lawyers. Not through fake companies. Man to man." I was so surprised I didn't speak for a second. "How did you get this number?" I finally asked. "It wasn't hard," he said, an edge of bitterness in his voice. "Your wife's investigator has been sniffing around my foundation's staff, asking about the donation. Your name came up. I put the pieces together. I know who you are. I know what you did, and you have caused me a world of trouble." I felt a defensive anger rise up. "You were paid to be there. You agreed." "I was tricked," he shot back, his voice rising. "I was told it was for a fan, not for some vindictive marital meltdown. Now my foundation is under scrutiny. My reputation is taking hits from gossip websites, and my sponsors are getting nervous. That donation was supposed to help. Now it's a poison pill. I want it gone. I want this whole mess gone." He was silent for a moment, breathing heavily. "Meet me. Tomorrow. Somewhere public but quiet. I just want to talk. To understand what the hell I got pulled into, and how we can both get out of it." I thought about it. Meeting him was a risk. But he was right. We were both caught in the same web. "Where?" I asked. He named a small, upscale park downtown, a place with walking paths and benches, often busy with office workers on lunch breaks. "Noon," he said, and hung up. I put the phone down. The chain reaction was still going. Now the two male figures in my wife's fantasy, the placeholder and the ideal, were going to meet. The question was no longer about winning a divorce. It was about whether either of us could survive the aftermath of a dream we never shared. The park was a curated slice of nature in the middle of the city's concrete. Neat gravel paths wound between carefully pruned trees and beds of flowers. Office workers sat on benches with takeout salads, and the air hummed with the distant sound of traffic. I spotted James Thorne immediately. He wasn't wearing his usual adventure gear. He had on dark jeans and a plain gray sweater, and he was pacing near a large fountain, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked smaller in person, less like a poster and more like a man. He saw me approaching and stopped pacing. His expression was closed off, guarded. "You came," he said, his voice flat. "I wasn't sure you would." "You asked," I replied, stopping a few feet away. We stood there for a moment, two strangers bound together by a shared disaster, sizing each other up. He finally gestured to a bench away from the main path. "Let's sit." We sat, an awkward space between us. He didn't look at me. He stared at the water cascading down the fountain. "I want you to understand something," he began, his words measured. "My life, my work, it's built on perception, on trust. People sponsor me, donate to my foundation, because they believe in a certain idea. The idea of purity, of challenge, of something above the messy, everyday stuff. What you did, it dragged me into the messy, everyday stuff. The divorce, the drama, the revenge. It makes me look like a pawn, or worse, a participant." I listened. "I didn't intend to damage your foundation," I said, which was true. "Your intention doesn't matter. The result does," he snapped, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were a sharp, clear blue, full of a frustration that had been simmering for weeks. "That blog post? The questions? My board is nervous. We had a corporate partner delay a six-figure pledge because of brand alignment concerns. That money was for air quality sensors for the next expedition. Now it's in limbo, because of your marital problems." Hearing it laid out so bluntly, the real-world cost of my actions, sent a pang of genuine guilt through me. The vault in my chest had begun to develop cracks. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "I want this to go away. All of it. The return donation is a start, but the story is still out there. The weird cafe scene, the mysterious donor. It's a stain. I need a counter-narrative. Something positive to put out there." "What does that have to do with me?" "You caused it," he said simply. "You owe me a solution. I've been thinking. We issue a joint statement. You and me. We say it was all a misunderstanding, a poorly executed surprise that went sideways. We express mutual respect. You, as the representative of the anonymous donor group, reaffirm your belief in my foundation's mission, maybe even pledge a smaller, simpler public donation. We kill the weird story with a boring, cooperative one. We shake hands for a photo. It gives me a clean win, and it gets you out from under the threat of her lawyers using the donation as a weapon. They can't call it a hidden asset if it's publicly given in a documented, positive way." I turned his proposal over in my mind. It was smart. It was a PR solution to a legal and personal problem. It would involve me publicly associating with him again, but this time on my terms as a businessman, not a cuckolded husband. It would take the poison out of that particular weapon. "And what do I get out of this, besides not being sued by you?" I asked. "You get closure on this part of the mess," he said. "And you get me to go away. I won't pursue any legal action. I'll sign whatever release you want. My lawyer will work with your lawyer to draft the statement. We both get to move on. This isn't about friendship. This is about mutual survival." He was right. This was a business deal. We were two damaged parties negotiating a ceasefire. "I need to think about it," I said. "I need to talk to my lawyer." He nodded, standing up. "Don't think too long. My PR team is ready to go. The sooner we do this, the sooner we can start burying the old story." He handed me a plain white business card with just a phone number on it. "That's my direct line. Give me your answer by tomorrow." He walked away, blending into the crowd of lunchtime strollers, just another man in a sweater. I went straight to Mr. Evans's office. I laid out the climber's proposal. To my surprise, my lawyer looked intrigued. "It's unorthodox, but it has strategic value," he mused, tapping his pen on his desk. "If we control the narrative of the donation, it completely undercuts her argument of wasteful concealment. We could even frame the returned money as a strategic pause, leading to this new public partnership. It makes you look like a savvy donor, not a vengeful husband. And getting a release from him removes a whole other legal front. I say we explore it." He drafted a list of demands: the ironclad release of all claims from Thorne, approval over the exact wording of the joint statement, and a stipulation that the photo be a simple handshake, no staged fraternity. We sent the terms back through the number on the card. The response came within an hour. Agreed. Draft the release. Let's meet tomorrow to sign and take the photo. The machinery of reputation repair was grinding into motion. The next meeting was in a professional photographer's studio. It was a neutral, bright space. Thorne arrived with a publicist, a sharp-eyed woman who shook my hand firmly. Mr. Evans was with me. There were no pleasantries. We signed the legal documents first, releasing each other from any and all claims related to the cafe incident and the donation. The climber's signature was a quick, aggressive slash. Mine was more careful. Then the publicist took over. She had drafted a short statement. It was masterfully bland. It spoke of shared goals, a regrettable misunderstanding in execution, and a renewed commitment to supporting environmental data collection. It made the whole cafe disaster sound like a corporate scheduling error. We both approved it. Then the photographer positioned us. We stood against a plain gray backdrop. Just a simple handshake, looking at the camera, professional smiles, the publicist directed. I put out my hand. Thorne took it. His grip was strong, calloused, but there was no warmth in it. Our eyes met. In his, I saw no forgiveness, just a pragmatic determination to put this behind him. In that moment, I saw him clearly. He wasn't a hero or a villain. He was a businessman who sold adventure, and I had been a bad for business. The camera flashed. Great, the photographer said. One more, just in case. We did it again, and it was done. The publicist said the statement and photo would go out on the foundation's wire service in 2 days. We left the studio without another word to each other. A clean, clinical end. Driving home, I felt a weird emptiness. Another chapter was closing, not with a bang of revenge or a sob of regret, but with the quiet click of a lawyer's pen and the flash of a camera. I had neutralized a threat. I had potentially improved my legal position. But the core problem remained: the divorce, the animosity, the vast, draining expense of it all. I stopped by my old neighborhood, not planning to, just driving on autopilot. I slowed the car as I passed our house. Her car was in the driveway. The curtains in the living room were open. I saw her. She was not performing for anyone. She was just sitting on the couch, alone in the middle of the day, staring at the blank television screen. She was perfectly still. The vibrant, animated woman who held court at brunch, the furious victim raging online, was gone. In her place was a hollowed-out stranger. There was no triumph in seeing her like that. Just a dull, aching sadness for the life we had both somehow ruined. I drove away. The placeholder had relocated. The idol had been negotiated with. And the woman between us was just a lonely figure in a window, a question mark at the center of all this noise. The legal and public relations maneuvers could create a kind of peace, but they couldn't answer the real question. After all the scores were settled and statements were issued, what would be left for any of us? The joint statement with the climber was released. It appeared in the business section of a few online outlets, a tiny blip of corporate news. Donor and foundation clarify partnership after misunderstanding. It was as exciting as watching paint dry, and that was the whole point. Mr. Evans forwarded it to her lawyer with a brief note. For your records regarding the asset in question. The threat of the wasted donation argument was officially dead. It felt like we had won a small, important battle. But the war of the divorce itself was still a grinding stalemate. Her side had gone quiet after the hidden account revelation, but they hadn't accepted our settlement offer either. They were just waiting. The tension was worse than the fighting. Every day cost me money in legal retainers just to maintain the status quo. I was stuck in a horrible purgatory, financially and emotionally. Gwen called me. Her tone was different, not her usual dry report. It was urgent. We need to meet. In person. I found something else. Something bigger. Do not talk to your lawyer until you see it. She gave me the address of a different storage facility on the industrial west side of the city. The paranoia that had become my constant companion flared. Was this a trap? But Gwen had been the only reliable source of advantage I had. I went. This unit was larger, a garage-sized space. Inside, under the harsh fluorescent light, were more of her boxes, but also pieces of furniture from the house I recognized. A side table, a floor lamp. She's clearing out, Gwen said, seeing my look. Preparing to sell, or just getting rid of memories. The private investigator stopped coming. But before he did, he was very interested in one particular box. The one labeled study. She pointed to a medium-sized cardboard box with the word scrawled in black marker. I took the liberty of pre-screening it. Look at the bottom. She handed me a pair of gloves. I knelt and opened the box. On top were old university textbooks, notebooks from courses she'd taken years ago. I lifted them out, my heart beating a little faster. Underneath was a layer of financial files. Old pay stubs, tax returns we had filed jointly. And then at the very bottom was a sleek black locking file box, the kind you buy at an office supply store. It was locked with a small combination lock. I couldn't open it without leaving marks, Gwen said. But given the context, I thought you might know the combination. I stared at it. I thought about her. Her birthdays, our anniversary, the usual easy combinations people use. Then I remembered something else. The date of the famous climb, the one where he nearly died, the one she had the pressed flower from. The date was etched in my mind from her teenage journal. I hesitated, then spun the tiny dials. I tried the date, month, day, year. The lock didn't budge. I tried it backwards. Nothing. I sat back on my heels, frustrated. Then a colder thought occurred to me. I tried the date from the star chart, the night we met. The lock clicked open. The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. She had used the combination of our beginning to lock away the evidence of her planned end. I lifted the lid. Inside were not bank statements. There were printed emails, itineraries, and brochures. Summit Dreams Travel. They were all for the same trip. The Thorn Traverse, a guided, ultra-exclusive trek through a Himalayan region the climber had famously mapped. The brochures were dog-eared. The printed emails were detailed inquiries about availability, difficulty, cost. The trip cost over $30,000 per person, and there were notes in her handwriting in the margins of the brochures. Need to upgrade boots. Save for this. The most recent email was from about 8 months ago. It was a response from the travel agency to her. It read, "Dear Chloe, thank you for your continued interest. We are holding a tentative spot for you on the fall departure. As discussed, a non-refundable deposit of $10,000 is required by the end of the month to secure it. We look forward to helping you achieve this incredible adventure." The date of the trip was 6 months after our anniversary dinner. The dinner where she called me a placeholder. She wasn't just waiting for someone better to magically appear. She had been actively planning, saving, and preparing to go to the place where her fantasy lived. She wasn't waiting for her real life to come to her. She was buying a ticket to it. And the deposit date? It was around the same time she had started being especially distant, especially critical. She had been counting down the days until she could afford to leave, until the placeholder's utility ran out. I took photos of everything, my hands steady but my mind reeling. This was more than a secret savings account. This was proof of intent. This was a blueprint for exit. It showed a clear, long-term plan that involved our marital income and ended with her on the other side of the world, chasing a ghost. Gwen watched me. "This is what they were looking for," she said quietly. "Not to use against you. To hide from you." The investigator was probably her lawyer's idea, trying to find and sanitize any evidence before formal discovery. They knew this was a nuclear bomb for their case. I looked up at her. "Why show me this? You could have just told me it was here." She met my gaze. "Because I don't like bullies. And her legal team is trying to bully you into poverty. This levels the field. My final invoice will reflect the strategic value of this find." I nodded. I understood. This was her profession, and she was very good at it. I drove home, the files burning a hole in my passenger seat. This changed everything. This wasn't just about winning a better settlement. This was about the entire story of our marriage. I had felt like a failure, a boring man she had settled for. But this evidence showed she had never been present at all. She had been a tenant, saving up to move to a better neighborhood. The placeholder wasn't just an insult, it was her business plan. I felt a cold, clear anger, different from the hot hurt of before. This was the anger of being used strategically and without remorse. That night, I composed an email. I sent it to her personal address, the first direct contact since the day at the cafe. I did not write a message. I attached 2 files. The first was a scan of the travel agency email about the $10,000 deposit for the Thorn Traverse. The second was a photo of the brochure page with her handwritten note. "Save for this." In the subject line of the email, I wrote a single question. Was this the real life you were saving for? I hovered over the send button. This was not a legal move. This was personal. This was me showing her that I knew, that I had seen the blueprint. I clicked send. The notification said it was delivered. I waited. No immediate response. No read receipt. Just the digital void. I didn't know what I expected. An apology? An explosion? More silence? An hour passed. Then my phone rang. It was not her. It was Mr. Evans. "Charles," he said, his voice tense. "I just got a call from her lawyer. They are ready to talk settlement. Seriously talk. They're asking for an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They sound different. Conciliatory. What did you do?" I looked at my sent email folder. "I just sent them a reality check," I said. The hook was not in the legal details or the financial demands. The hook was now in her mind. She knew I had the evidence of her secret life. The question was, what would she do now that her fantasy was exposed not as a romantic dream, but as a secret financial plan? Would she fight harder, or would she finally face the real world she had been trying to escape? The settlement meeting was not in a lawyer's office. It was in a bland, professional mediation suite downtown, a room designed to be neutral and soulless. I sat with Mr. Evans on one side of a wide, polished table. On the other side was her new lawyer, a middle-aged woman with a calm, tired face, and my wife. It was the first time I had seen her in person since the cafe. The change was jarring. The vibrant, performing woman was gone. She looked thin, her eyes shadowed. She wore simple clothes and no makeup. She did not look at me. She stared at the tabletop, her hands folded in her lap. She was not playing the martyr anymore. She looked defeated. Her lawyer did most of the talking. "My client is prepared to accept the terms of your latest proposal," she began, her voice even. "A 50-50 division of all marital assets as documented in the revised disclosures. The house will be sold and net proceeds split equally. No spousal support. A mutual release of all claims. We have drawn up the agreement." She slid a thick document across the table. Mr. Evans took it, putting on his reading glasses to scan the first pages. He glanced at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. This was capitulation. This was the white flag. "This appears to be in order, based on our proposal," he said cautiously. "We will need a few hours to review the full document, of course." "Of course," her lawyer said. There was a pause. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. My wife still had not moved. I found my voice. "I agree to the terms in principle," I said. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine for a fraction of a second, then dropped back down. There was no anger there. No hatred. Just a hollow exhaustion. "There is one condition," I added. Both lawyers looked at me. "All contact ceases upon signing. Permanently. No follow-up communications unless through legal channels regarding the execution of the agreement. We are done." Her lawyer looked at her client. My wife gave a single, small nod, her eyes still on the table. "That is acceptable," her lawyer said. The meeting was over in 20 minutes. We stood to leave. As we walked out of the room, my wife lingered behind with her lawyer. I did not look back. In the elevator, Mr. Evans let out a long breath. "I have to say, Charles, I did not expect that. I expected a fight over the hidden account, arguments about the travel plans. Not this. It's the best possible outcome. You should be pleased." I nodded, but I didn't feel pleased. I felt empty. The war was over, and I had won on paper. But the cost felt immense. We signed the final papers a week later in separate rooms. The divorce was granted. It was a simple line on a docket. I walked out of the courthouse a free man, the financial and legal bonds dissolved. The sun was bright. The city moved around me, oblivious. I stood on the steps, the folder of legal documents under my arm, and waited for the surge of relief, of victory. It didn't come. Instead, I felt untethered, like a boat cut loose and drifting. I had my life back, but I didn't know what that life was anymore. It was just an apartment, a job, and a lot of quiet. The grand project of my revenge was complete. The placeholder had not just relocated. He had built a new, solitary country. And it was very, very quiet. I went back to work. Colleagues who had been distant offered awkward congratulations on getting everything sorted. I nodded and thanked them. I tried to focus on spreadsheets, on audits, on the clean logic of numbers. But my mind kept drifting to the look on her face at the mediation table. Not the face of the woman who had humiliated me, but the face of a stranger who had lost everything, including her dream. I drove past the house one last time. The for sale sign was up. It looked like just another house. The stage for our 7-year performance was being sold to new actors. A few days later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. I opened it. There was no greeting, no signature. Just a few lines of text. "I read your email. You wanted to know. The answer is no. I was not saving for a real life. I was saving for an idea. The idea was the only thing that made the real life bearable. The trip was never going to happen. I was never brave enough. You were right about one thing. I was the placeholder. I was waiting for a version of myself that didn't exist. I am sorry for what I said. It was cruel. And true. For both of us." I read it 3 times. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. It was the closest thing to an honest conversation we'd had in years. I didn't reply. What was there to say? The audit was closed. The books were balanced. I thought that was the end. The story was over. The legal loose ends would be tied up by lawyers and realtors. I would move on. But the world, it seemed, was not quite done with me. A week after the divorce was finalized, my phone rang. It was Mr. Evans. His voice was grim, stripped of its usual professional calm. "Charles, we have a problem. A new lawsuit. It was just served on my office." My heart sank. "Her? She can't. We signed a release." "It's not from her," he said. "It's from him, James Thorne. Or rather, from his foundation's new lawyers. They are suing you for defamation, intentional interference with business relations, and misuse of likeness. They claim your actions, specifically the fraudulent donation scheme and the resulting scandal, caused quantifiable damage to his brand and his foundation's ability to raise funds. They're asking for damages in the millions." I was speechless. The climber. We had shaken hands. We had signed a release. But we have a release. We signed it. The joint statement. They are arguing the release was signed under duress and based on fraudulent concealment, Mr. Evans explained, sounding exhausted. They claim you concealed the full extent of your malicious intent, and that the true damage to his reputation only became clear later, after the joint statement failed to fully quell the negative stories. They're calling the cafe event a commercial appropriation of his image. It's aggressive, and it's frivolous in my opinion, but it's a lawsuit. And it's public. It will be in the papers. I slumped into my chair. The chain reaction was still going. I had made peace with my enemy, only to find out she was never the only enemy. The fantasy I had weaponized had its own legal team, and they were coming for what was left. The divorce was over, but the fallout was a living thing, and it was hungry. The placeholder was free, but he was not safe. The question now was not about love or revenge. It was about survival. How many battles did one war contain? The new lawsuit was like a grenade rolling into the quiet, empty room my life had become. I read the legal documents Mr. Evans sent over. The language was dramatic. Willful and malicious conduct. Irreparable harm to reputation. Unjust enrichment. They claimed the cafe stunt had caused sponsors to pull out, had created a cloud of suspicion around the foundation, and had turned a respected public figure into a laughingstock. They wanted millions. It was absurd. It was terrifying. My first call wasn't to Mr. Evans. It was to the number on the business card James Thorne had given me. It went straight to a generic voicemail. I didn't leave a message. He had blocked me, or the number was dead. This was not the man from the park, negotiating a truce. This was the institution of James Thorne fighting for its life, and its lawyers had decided I was the source of the infection. Mr. Evans was grimly determined. "We fight this. We countersue. We argue breach of the release agreement. We argue that his participation was contractual, that he was paid, and that any damage to his reputation is due to his own foundation's shaky finances, not your actions. We drag him through discovery. We make it so expensive and ugly for him that he'll beg to settle." It was the same war, just a different battlefield. The thought of another year, maybe two, of legal depositions, of six-figure legal bills, of my name in the papers again as some kind of psychotic stalker, made me feel physically ill. I had just bought my freedom at a great price. Now they were trying to put me in a new cage. The story broke in the press 2 days later. A business news website ran the headline, "Mountaineer Foundation sues placeholder, husband in bizarre divorce fallout." They had dug up the old cafe gossip and connected it to the new lawsuit. My name, my photo from my company website, everything was out there. At work, the atmosphere changed again. The awkward congratulations turned into averted eyes and hushed conversations. My boss called me into his corner office. He was a decent man, but he looked pained. "Charles, this situation. The firm values you. You're a great accountant. But we sell discretion and stability. This kind of public, ongoing litigation. It's a problem for client confidence. The partners are suggesting a paid leave of absence. Until these personal matters are resolved. It's not a termination. Just a pause." It was a polite exile. I was being benched because my life was too dramatic. The ultimate irony. I had become the very thing she accused me of not being, a source of chaos. And it was costing me my career. I packed a box of my things from the office that evening. No one made eye contact as I left. I drove home, but I didn't go inside my apartment. I just sat in the car in the parking garage, the engine off, surrounded by concrete and the smell of motor oil. I thought about the settlement money I would eventually get from the house sale. I thought about the mountain of legal debt I was about to accrue fighting Thorne. I thought about the empty apartment waiting for me. A profound despair, cold and heavy, settled over me. What was the point? I had won the divorce but lost everything else. The fantasy of just walking away, of disappearing, became overpowering. I could withdraw what cash I had, abandon the lawsuits, and just go. Change my name. Start over somewhere no one knew the story. The temptation was like a siren song. My phone buzzed in the quiet car. It was a text from an unknown number. You should check the news. Another development. Not good. Gee, Gwen. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up a news feed. There was a follow-up article. The headline made my stomach drop. Ex-wife seeks to reopen divorce settlement amid new litigation. The article quoted her new lawyer. The argument was clever and brutal. They claimed that my fraudulent and malicious conduct with the climber, now the subject of a major lawsuit, constituted a waste of marital assets and fraudulent conveyance designed to deprive her of her fair share. They were arguing that because I was now being sued for millions over my actions, and those actions happened during the marriage, she was entitled to a bigger piece of the remaining pie to compensate for the liability I had created. They were using Thorne's attack on me to attack me again. The system was a snake eating its own tail. The divorce was final, but it was never really over. It was a black hole, sucking everything back in. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the parking garage felt like they were closing in. I got out of the car and started walking, with no destination. The city lights were blurry. I walked for blocks, my mind a riot of panic and fury. They wouldn't let me go. She wouldn't let me go. He wouldn't let me go. I was trapped in an infinite loop of their making. I found myself outside a quiet, dark park. I sat on a bench, head in my hands. I had never felt so utterly alone. The placeholder had been removed from the relationship, but he had become the central villain in a legal and public narrative that had taken on a life of its own. I was a character in a story I no longer controlled. After a long time, I pulled out my phone. I did something impulsive, stupid. I dialed her number, the old one from memory. It rang twice, then went to a generic automated voicemail. The mailbox is full. She had changed her number. Of course she had. She was done. She had gotten her settlement and cut the cord. I was the one still tangled in the wires. The finality of that full mailbox hit me harder than any legal document. I was truly, completely alone in this. The person who had started it all had moved on, leaving me to face the monsters I had arguably helped create. I sat there in the dark park for I don't know how long. The despair began to harden into something else. A cold, clear rage. Not at her, not even at him anymore. At the situation. At the relentless, grinding machinery of consequence that had taken a single act of revenge and turned it into a life-consuming monster. I couldn't run. I had nowhere to run to. I couldn't surrender. Surrender meant financial and professional death. There was only one direction left, forward, through the mess. I had to find a way to break the loop. But how do you fight a reflection in a mirror? How do you win a war against the echoes of your own actions? I stood up from the bench. My legs were stiff. I started the long walk back to my apartment, to my empty, quiet prison. The battle lines were redrawn. The enemy was no longer a person. It was the story itself. And I had to find a way to rewrite the ending or be consumed by it. The walk back to my apartment felt like a march through a defeated city. The cold rage I had felt in the park settled into a grim, numb resolve. I couldn't run. I had to face the hydra I'd created. When I got to my building, the night doorman gave me a strange look, a mix of pity and curiosity. The news articles were doing their work. I ignored him, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the button for my floor. The ascension was smooth and quiet. The doors opened to my hallway, a long, carpeted stretch of identical doors. As I walked toward mine, I saw a figure leaning against the wall next to my apartment door. My heart lurched. It wasn't the aggressive friend. It was James Thorne. He was alone. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, and he looked up as I approached. He didn't look like a litigious public figure. He looked tired, edgy, and out of place in the residential hallway. "You," I said, stopping a few feet away. "What are you doing here? Your lawyers are suing me for millions." "I know," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk? Inside? 5 minutes. No lawyers. Just talk." He sounded like he had in the park, but more desperate. After a moment, I unlocked the door and gestured him in. He walked into the sparse living area, glancing around at the bare walls and the single chair. He didn't sit. He paced a small circle, that same restless energy from the park. "I didn't want the lawsuit," he said abruptly, turning to face me. "My board." The new lawyers they hired for damage control. They insisted. They said we needed to show strength, to go on the offensive to protect the brand. That the joint statement wasn't enough. They said it was the only way to definitively separate me from the mess. So you let them, I stated flatly. I didn't have a choice, he snapped, his frustration boiling over. You don't understand. The foundation is everything. It's my legacy. It's how I fund the science, the expeditions, my entire life's work. After the blog posts, 2 major corporate backers delayed their pledges. A third canceled. We're facing a budget shortfall that could shutter us in a year. The lawyers said a strong lawsuit would signal to the remaining donors that we were victims, that we were fighting back. It's not personal. It's survival. Hearing him say it, I almost laughed. It was the same cold calculus I had used. It wasn't personal, it was business. It was survival. We were mirrors. And what about the release we signed? The one that says we release each other from all claims. They say it's voidable, that you concealed your true intent. I don't know the legal details. I just know they told me it was the only play. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure agitation. But I hate it. I hate the headlines. I hate being tied to this divorce drama. It's beneath me. It's cheap. And it's not working. The lawsuit just dug up the whole story again. It's all anyone is talking about now. Not the climate data. Not the expeditions. Just this stupid cafe and the angry husband. He finally stopped pacing and looked at me, his famous blue eyes sharp. I came here because I'm not sure my lawyer's way is the right way. I think they're making it worse. And I'm here to see if there's another way out. For both of us. I studied him. The hero was gone. In his place was a middle-aged man terrified of his own obsolescence, fighting to keep his dream afloat. Just like me. What are you proposing? I asked. We call it off, he said, his voice intense. Both lawsuits. Yours and mine. We issue another joint statement. We say that after further discussion, we have amicably resolved our differences and are putting the matter behind us. No money changes hands. We just walk away. You get your ex-wife's lawyers off your back about the fraudulent conveyance because the lawsuit disappears. I get to tell my board I personally resolved the threat, that I showed leadership. I get a cleaner narrative than an ugly court fight. And your foundation's budget whole? I asked. He looked away, a muscle in his jaw twitching. I'll find another way. A speaking tour. A book advance. Something. But this legal fight is a distraction, and it's poisoning the well. His offer was a surrender. A mutual disarmament. It was also my only real chance for a clean exit. To continue fighting meant financial ruin, and more years of my life defined by this saga. But agreeing felt like losing. It felt like letting him, and by extension her fantasy, win by default. Why would I trust you? I said. You agreed to a truce before, and then your lawyers sued me. Because I'm here, he said simply. Without them, they don't know I'm here. If we agree, I'll have to fight them to drop it. It won't be easy, but I will, because I am so tired of this. I believed him. I saw the exhaustion in him, a reflection of my own. We were 2 shipwrecked men on the same piece of driftwood, arguing over who owned the splinters. I need to think, I said. I need to talk to my lawyer. Don't think too long, he said, echoing his words from the park. The longer this drags on, the harder it is to stop. My number is the same. Call me. He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. I stood in the middle of my empty apartment, the echo of his desperation hanging in the air. I didn't call Mr. Evans immediately. I sat in a single chair and thought. Thorne's offer was a way out. A boring, undramatic, practical way out. It meant giving up any hope of a public vindication, of beating him in court. It meant swallowing the insult of the lawsuit and moving on. It was the mature, sensible thing to do. It was what the old me, the stable accountant, would have done. But the old me was gone. He had been incinerated in the fire of the cafe stunt. Who was left? A man capable of orchestrating a complex public humiliation. A man who had gone to war and found it endless. That man looked at Thorne's offer and saw not peace, but another transaction where I came out with less than I deserved. Yet, the alternative was more war. More money, more time, more life poured into a bottomless pit. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my home security system. I had a camera still active at the old house, a leftover from before I moved out. I had forgotten about it. The notification said, "Motion detected, back door." Curious, and maybe looking for a distraction, I opened the live feed. It was night, but the camera had good low-light capability. I saw her. My ex-wife. She was in the back hallway, near the door to the garage. She was loading a single large suitcase into the trunk of her car, which I could see in the garage through the open door. She moved quickly, efficiently. This wasn't a casual trip. This looked like a departure. She went back inside, then returned with a backpack and a smaller duffel bag. She threw them into the passenger seat. Then she got into the driver's seat. The interior light came on. I could see her face, illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. She looked determined, set. She leaned forward and tapped something on her phone, then mounted it on the dash. The camera's resolution was high enough that when she leaned back, I could see the screen of her phone clearly. It was a navigation app. The destination was typed in, Kathmandu Airport, and below it, the flight information ticker read, Departure, 23:45. Confirmed. My breath caught in my throat. Kathmandu, Nepal, the gateway to the Himalayas, to the Thorn Traverse. She was going. After everything. After the humiliation, the collapse of the fantasy, the divorce, the email where she said she was never brave enough. She was going. She was doing the thing. The placeholder was gone. The idol was suing me, and she was buying a ticket to the dream. The ultimate rejection of the life we had, and of the war we were still fighting. She was leaving it all behind. I watched, stunned, as she backed the car out of the garage. The camera feed went black as she drove out of range. She was gone. To the airport, to the mountains, to the real life she had always wanted, or to the brutal reality of chasing a ghost. I didn't know, but she was free, and I was still here, in my empty apartment, negotiating with her tarnished hero over the legal rubble of our collapsed world. The hook was no longer about lawsuits or settlements. It was about that phone screen, glowing in the dark garage, with a destination that was the punchline to my entire sad, vengeful joke. She had found a way out. The question that remained, burning in my mind as I sat alone, was whether I was brave enough or foolish enough to find my own. Watching her taillights vanish from the security camera feed felt like the final, silent punch of a long fight. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Kathmandu. She had actually done it. While I was strategizing legal defenses and negotiating ceasefires with her fallen idol, she had packed a bag and bought a one-way ticket to the fantasy. The absurdity of it was staggering. All of my careful plans, my revenge, my audits, my spreadsheets, they had pinned her down, humiliated her, even broken her for a time. But in the end, she was the one who got on a plane. She was the one chasing the horizon. I was the one left in a beige room, staring at screens. The placeholder, it turned out, was still in place. Right here. Stuck. I didn't call James Thorne back that night. His offer of a mutual retreat, which had seemed so urgent an hour ago, now felt small and pathetic. What did I care about legal narratives and board approvals? My ex-wife was flying over the ocean to walk on a mountain he had made famous. The symbolism was so perfect it was cruel. He had the fame. She had the courage to chase it. And I had a lawsuit. I went to bed but didn't sleep. My mind replayed the image of her phone screen, the glowing letters of the airport name. It was an escape I couldn't have imagined, an end I hadn't planned for. The next morning, gritty-eyed and numb, I forced myself to think practically. Her departure changed things legally. Her lawyer's motion to reopen the settlement was now being pursued by a client who was fleeing the jurisdiction, potentially for a long time. That might weaken their position. But Thorne's lawsuit was still very real. I called Mr. Evans and told him about Thorne's late-night visit and his proposal to mutually drop the suits. I did not mention the airport. That felt private, a separate wound. Mr. Evans was skeptical but pragmatic. If he's serious, and he can get his lawyers to stand down, it's our best exit. Litigating against a well-funded nonprofit with a sympathetic figurehead is a money pit, Charles. Even if we win, we lose. A clean walkaway is a gift. But we need it in writing, a formal dismissal with prejudice, so they can't come back later. He told me to set up a formal meeting with Thorne and his counsel. I texted Thorne the number from his card. My lawyer says we need a formal meeting with your lawyers present to discuss dismissal. Are you serious about this? The reply came quickly. Yes. My office. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. It was done. I spent the rest of the day in a fog. I tried to work on a personal budget, but the numbers swam. The money from the house sale would be coming eventually. It would be enough to live on for a while, maybe even restart somewhere else. But the thought of starting over, of building another life from scratch, felt exhausting. The fight had hollowed me out. There was no fuel left for dreams, only for survival. The meeting at Thorne's foundation office was a study in tense professionalism. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows and photos of dramatic mountain peaks. Thorne sat at the head of the table, flanked by two lawyers, one older, who looked like a classic corporate litigator, and one younger, who kept glancing at his boss with barely concealed frustration. Mr. Evans and I sat opposite them. Thorne spoke first, his public persona firmly back in place. "Thank you for coming. We believe the continued litigation serves no one's interests. We propose a mutual release and dismissal of all claims, with each side bearing its own costs. A clean end." His older lawyer smoothly added, "We will require a confidentiality clause regarding the terms and the underlying events." Mr. Evans countered, "We will agree to dismissal with prejudice. No confidentiality. What's public is already public. We're not hiding anything. And we need a statement from your client that he initiated this dismissal to prevent any future claims of coercion." The younger lawyer shifted in his seat. "Our client's reputation," Thorne cut him off. "It's fine. No confidentiality. And you can say I initiated it. Let's just end it." There was a brief, charged look between Thorne and his younger lawyer. The board's attack dog clearly didn't like the peace treaty, but the boss had spoken. We hammered out a one-page agreement. We would both file to dismiss our suits within 24 hours. No money exchanged. No apologies. Just an end. We all signed. As I stood to leave, Thorne caught my eye. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't friendly. It was an acknowledgement. We had both climbed down from a ledge. The meeting was over in 30 minutes. The war with the mountain was done. Walking out of the building with Mr. Evans, I felt a shallow sense of relief. One fire was out. "That's good, Charles," Mr. Evans said. "Really? Now we focus on beating back her motion to reopen. With her out of the country, it'll be harder for them. We might even get them to drop it." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. On a plane over the Atlantic. Back in my apartment, the quiet was louder than ever. I checked the security camera feed at the house out of habit. Empty. Still. A for sale sign in the front yard. I packed the camera away into a box. It was time to stop watching her life, even the empty shell of it. I had to figure out what my life was. I had no job, thanks to the leave of absence. I had a decent chunk of money coming. I had no attachments. The freedom was absolute, and it was terrifying. A few days later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photographic print. It was a picture of a massive, jagged mountain peak at sunrise, the snow glowing pink and gold. It was breathtaking. On the back, in handwriting I knew too well, was a note. It said, "You asked if this was the real life I was saving for. I don't know yet, but it's real. It's hard, and it's quiet. Thank you for the push. I never would have done it without the fall. No hard feelings." It was signed with just her initial. No hard feelings. After everything. She was thanking me. The push. The fall. My revenge, my grand, cruel performance, had been the catalyst for her to finally live the dream she used to torture me with. The irony was so dense I could taste it, metallic and bitter. I stared at the photo for a long time. The beauty was undeniable. It was a world away from spreadsheets and legal documents and empty apartments. It was the world she had always wanted. And in a strange, twisted way, I had given it to her. The placeholder had, in the end, held the door open for her escape. I put the photo on my bare kitchen counter, leaning it against the wall. It was the only decoration in the whole place. I sat down and looked at it. The hook wasn't about legal battles or past loves anymore. It was about that mountain. It was about the quiet in the photo, which was so different from the quiet in my room. Her quiet was earned by effort, by risk, by stepping into the unknown. My quiet was just an absence, the void left after the explosion. She had found a path, however twisted, to something real. The question that sat with me now, as I looked from the mountain peak to my four blank walls, was simple and devastating. What was my path? What did Charles, the accountant, the placeholder, the vengeful ex-husband, the survivor of a legal war, actually want? The fight was over. The enemies were gone or transformed. All that was left was me. And I had no idea who that was, or where he was supposed to go. The story of US was finished. The story of me hadn't even begun. The photograph of the mountain lived on my counter like a guest from another world. I would make coffee and its impossible peak would be there, glowing in the morning light from my window. I would eat a silent dinner and its vast, frozen slopes would stare back at me. It wasn't just a picture, it was a verdict. She was there, in that harsh, beautiful landscape, living the question that had broken us. And I was here, in a city that felt suddenly flat and meaningless, surrounded by the paper remnants of our war. The lawsuits were dismissed. Her motion to reopen the divorce faded away once her lawyer couldn't readily contact her. The legal machinery finally ground to a halt. The silence that followed was complete. It was the silence after a long, loud argument, when you realize the other person has left the house for good. There was no more buzzing phone, no more tense meetings, no more envelopes from lawyers. There was just the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the mountain on the counter. I had to get out of the apartment. I started walking the city for hours with no destination. I walked through neighborhoods I'd never seen, past cafes and parks and construction sites. I watched people living their lives, arguing on phone calls, laughing with friends, walking dogs. I felt like a ghost, observing a world I was no longer part of. My leave of absence from work became permanent. The firm offered a modest severance, a polite way of saying don't come back. I took it. The money from the house sale cleared. The numbers in my bank account were healthy, more than I had ever had at one time. They were the spoils of my war, the financial representation of a marriage dissolved. I could live on it for a few years if I was careful. I had all the freedom and security I could want. And it felt like nothing. I thought about what I was good at. I was good at numbers. I was good at seeing patterns, at finding the hidden story in a column of data. I was good at planning and executing complex, detailed operations. I had just proven that in the most dramatic way possible. But the thought of going back to a corporate accounting job made my skin crawl. It was the world of the placeholder, the stable, boring life that had been both my armor and my prison. I couldn't put that armor back on. It didn't fit anymore. One afternoon, during my wanderings, I found myself outside the building that housed James Thorne's foundation. I stood across the street, looking up at the sleek glass facade. I thought about going in, not to see him, but to see the operation, to look at the numbers that fueled the dreams. It was a crazy thought, but it was a thought. I didn't go in. I kept walking. A few days later, I was in a bookstore, drifting through the travel section. My hand stopped on a guidebook for Nepal. I didn't pull it off the shelf. I just looked at the spine. Kathmandu. The name was no longer just a painful punchline. It was a place on a map. A place she had gone to answer her question. What was my question? I didn't have a mountain to climb. I didn't have a fantasy to chase. My fantasy had been revenge, and I had lived it, and it had left me empty. So what now? The guidebook seemed to mock me. I left the store. The answer, when it came, wasn't a dramatic epiphany. It was a slow, quiet realization that grew over days of walking and staring at walls. I was good at solving problems. I had just solved my own, in the most destructive way imaginable. But the skill was real. Gwen, the process server, had seen it. She had called on me to audit my own wife's boxes. She had treated me like a resource. I thought about her niche agency, her network, her ability to find things people wanted to hide. That was a world of problems. Messy, personal, human problems. Not corporate financials, but the secret ledgers of people's lives. It was a world that needed someone who could think like a forensic accountant, but operate in the shadows. The thought was both unsettling and intriguing. It was the opposite of boring. It was a different kind of stability, one based on skill and discretion, not on wearing a tie in a cubicle. I didn't call Gwen. Not yet. First, I had to test the idea on something else. I needed to see if I could still solve a problem that wasn't my own, without the fuel of anger or revenge. I went online, to a forum where small business owners sometimes posted bookkeeping issues. I found a post from a woman who ran a small bakery. She was convinced her part-time bookkeeper was skimming small amounts of cash, but she couldn't prove it, and she couldn't afford a forensic audit. She just had a gut feeling and a mess of receipts. I sent her a private message. I didn't give my real name. I said I was a retired accountant looking to stay sharp, and I'd look at her books for free, no strings attached. She was skeptical but desperate. She sent me scanned files, bank statements, invoices, cash register logs. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the old focus. I built a spreadsheet. I tracked every cash deposit against every supplier invoice and every shift log. I looked for patterns, for tiny discrepancies. It took me 3 days, and I found it. A simple, clever skimming scheme where the bookkeeper was voiding a few cash transactions each week and pocketing the difference. The amounts were small, but they added up. I wrote a clear, concise report for the bakery owner, showing the evidence. I felt a clean, sharp satisfaction when she wrote back, her message full of stunned gratitude. She confronted the bookkeeper, who confessed. It was a small victory. It fixed a small problem. It didn't change the world, but it used my skills for something concrete and positive. It felt real. I looked at the mountain photo again. Her path was physical, a challenge against rock and ice. My path, it seemed, was cerebral. It was about order, about finding truth in chaos, about fixing broken ledgers in small businesses and maybe, just maybe, in broken lives. It was not glamorous. It would not make me famous. But it was a skill I had, reshaped by fire. I could be a fixer, a solver of hidden problems, a finder of truths for people who couldn't afford the big firms. It was a path. I still didn't call Gwen. I knew that world was there, a darker parallel to what I was imagining. Maybe our paths would cross again professionally. Maybe not. I packed a bag. Not for a mountain, but for a trip. A small one. I decided to drive up the coast, to see the ocean from a cliffside, to be somewhere where the horizon was a simple line between water and sky, not a wall of glass buildings. I needed to breathe air that didn't smell of my own regret. As I locked my apartment door, I took one last look at the photograph. I didn't leave it behind. I put it in my bag. Not as a trophy or a wound, but as a reminder that paths exist, even the ones you never planned to take. The road out of the city was open ahead of me, a gray ribbon leading to an unknown coast. I had no grand plan, no revenge to plot, no battle to fight, just a car, some money, a set of skills, and a vast, unsettling freedom. The story of Charles, the accountant, was closed. The story of whatever came next was a blank page, and for the first time in a very long time, that didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning, quiet and uncertain, and entirely my own. The hook was no longer about the past. It was about the road, the coast, and the question of what a man built for stability does when he chooses to embrace the unknown. The coastal highway was a gray ribbon stitched between ragged cliffs and the endless, churning Pacific. I drove with the windows down, the salt air whipping through the car, scouring away the stale smell of my apartment and the lingering dust of legal papers. I didn't have a destination, just a direction north. The first night, I stayed in a motel that smelled of mildew and pine cleaner. I lay in the dark and listened to the ocean, a constant roar that was the opposite of the city's hum. It was a noise that didn't want anything from me. It just was. In the morning, I bought a cheap notebook and a pen. I started writing. Not a journal of feelings, but a ledger of possibilities. I listed my skills: forensic accounting, financial analysis, research, project management. I listed what I knew painfully well: divorce law, private investigation, reputational management, the mechanics of revenge. It was a strange resume. On another page, I sketched a rough business plan. A consultancy, not for big corporations, but for individuals and small businesses caught in financial knots, in disputes where the truth was buried in numbers. A one-man operation. Discreet. I could call it something bland like Veritas Solutions. Truth Solutions. It felt right. It felt like using the weapon I had forged in my own personal war for something that wasn't destruction. After 3 days of driving and walking on cold, empty beaches, I turned inland. The ocean had done its work. It had shaken loose the inertia. I found a small university town nestled in redwoods. It felt like a place that existed outside of my old story. I rented a furnished cottage on a month-to-month lease. It had a view of trees, not other apartments. I set up my laptop on the kitchen table. I filed the paperwork to create a sole proprietorship. Veritas Solutions. I built a simple, professional website. I described my services in clear, calm language. Financial clarity for complex personal and business situations. I didn't advertise. I let the site sit there, a digital shingle in the vastness of the internet. It was a start. Then I did something else. I wrote an email. It was to the bakery owner I had helped. I told her I was starting a small consultancy and asked if she would be willing to write a brief testimonial. She wrote back immediately, not just with a glowing testimonial, but with the name of a friend who owned a local bookstore and was having trouble with a shady distributor. She can't prove they're short shipping her, but her inventory numbers are a mess. Could you talk to her? It was a referral. My first client. I called the bookstore owner. We met in her cluttered, cozy shop. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a clear sense of being cheated. I took her records back to my cottage. It was a simpler puzzle than the bakery, just a matter of reconciling purchase orders with delivery invoices and sales data. In 2 days, I had a clear report showing a consistent 5% shortfall in shipments from the distributor. She had her evidence. She paid me my fee, which felt like a fortune, not because of the amount, but because it was earned honestly for fixing a problem, not creating one. Word began to spread slowly in that small town. A restaurant owner thought his partner was dipping into the till. A landlord suspected a tenant of subletting illegally. My niche became clear. I was the guy you called when you had a bad feeling and a pile of confusing paperwork. I was the human audit. It was quiet work. It was good work. The mountain photo was now on my cottage wall, next to the window overlooking the redwoods. It no longer felt like a verdict. It felt like a landscape, a different path on a different continent. We had both, in our own ways, left the cage. Months passed. The seasons changed in the redwoods. My business grew, not explosively but steadily. I had enough. One afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number with a city area code. I almost didn't answer. Old habits. But I did. "Is this Veritas Solutions?" a woman's voice asked. It was smooth, professional, and familiar. It was Gwen. "It is," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I heard you'd set up shop," she said. There was a hint of what might have been amusement in her tone. "Small world. I have a potential client. A situation that requires financial forensics and discretion. More in your new wheelhouse than your old one. It's sensitive. The fee would be significant." She described the case. A philanthropist suspected the director of a charity she funded was embezzling, but she wanted proof before going to the authorities, and she wanted it done quietly. It was exactly the kind of work I was doing, just on a larger scale. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you understand the value of a clean audit," Gwen said simply. "And you're not afraid of messy human stories. Are you interested?" I looked out the window at the redwoods, solid and enduring. I looked at the mountain on my wall. "Yes," I said. "Send me the details." It was not a return to the old world. It was an acknowledgement that the skills forged there had value in the new one. Gwen was not a friend. She was a colleague, a connection in a network I was now part of by choice. Life became a pattern of quiet cases in my small town, punctuated by the occasional larger, more complex project from Gwen's network. I was good at it. I found a strange peace in the process of solving other people's puzzles. It left my own past in the past, where it belonged. One evening, I was having a coffee at the local bookstore, my first client, now a friend. The news was playing softly on a small TV behind the counter. A story came on about a famous mountaineer. I looked up. It was him, James Thorne. He was announcing a new, ambitious expedition, fully funded by a coalition of European outdoor companies. His foundation, the report said, had been restructured and had secured stable, long-term funding. He looked tanned and vital, back in his element. The scandal, the lawsuit, the cafe, they were just footnotes, if that. He had climbed out of his hole too. The story moved on to the weather. I finished my coffee. I felt nothing. No resentment. No satisfaction. Just the observation that he too had found a path forward. I never heard from my ex-wife again. No more postcards, no letters. I sometimes wondered if she made it to the base camp of the Thorn Traverse, if she stood looking up at that impossible peak. I hoped, for her sake, that she found whatever she was looking for, even if it wasn't what she expected. The photograph remained on my wall. It was no longer about her or him. It was a reminder that the world is vast, and that there are many ways to get lost, and many ways to be found. My life now is not grand. It is not an adventure. It is a quiet cottage in the woods, a satisfying job, a slowly expanding circle of acquaintances who know me as Charles, the numbers guy who can fix things. It is a life built on truth, however messy, instead of fantasy or revenge. It is stable, but it is not a placeholder. It is mine. I built it from the wreckage, board by board. The story of the placeholder pronouncement, the forensic audit, the instrument of delivery, the performance, the war, the unraveling. It is a closed book on my shelf. I do not open it often, but I do not regret it. It was the crucible that forged the man who now sits in this quiet cottage, looking at the trees, waiting for the next puzzle to solve. The road here was twisted and dark, but it led to a place of calm. The final question, the one that used to keep me awake, has been answered. What does a man built for stability do when he chooses the unknown? He learns that stability isn't a place you stay. It's a skill you carry, and you can use it to build a new life, anywhere, even here. The story ends not with a bang or a whimper, but with the sound of wind in the redwoods and the quiet click of a mouse as I open my next case file. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is living. The evening had started with such careful, quiet hope. 7 years of marriage felt like a milestone, something solid. People said the 7th anniversary was copper, for durability, for things that last. As I, Charles, adjusted the framed star chart on the dining table, lining it up perfectly with her plate, I thought about that. Copper was warm. It was reliable. It wasn't flashy, but it was strong. I looked around the room I had prepared. The meal was her favorite, a complicated recipe I'd spent the whole afternoon getting right. The wedding china was out, the good stuff we only used for the most important occasions, which seemed to be fewer and farther between these days. Candles flickered, soft music played, and the air smelled like herbs and slow-cooked meat. It was a scene from a movie about rekindling love. I had planned it all to be perfect, to remind her of us, of the story we began before it got buried under grocery lists and quiet evenings and a slow, steady drift I could feel but couldn't seem to stop. I wanted a spark. I needed a sign that we could find our way back from wherever we had lost the path. She came home later than I expected, but she'd texted, so I kept the food warm. She swept in, dropping her bag by the door, and gave me a quick, dry kiss on the cheek. Her eyes were already somewhere else. "This looks nice," she said, her voice pleasant but distant, the kind of tone you use when you compliment a coworker's new haircut. She sat down, and I poured the wine, a bottle I'd been saving. That's when I saw it. Her phone was face up on the tablecloth, right next to her fork. It was a silent, gleaming rectangle of polished glass, and almost immediately, it began to light up. Not with calls, but with a rapid, pulsing glow of notifications. I recognized the little icon from across the table. It was from that social media app, the one used by climbers and adventurers. She saw me looking. Instead of flipping the phone over, an apology in her eyes, she picked it up. A real smile, one I hadn't seen in months, touched her lips. "Oh," she said, her voice suddenly alive. "He's going live. This is the update from base camp." And just like that, the dinner, the candles, the star chart, we all vanished. What followed was a monologue. She narrated the live feed as if she were a sports commentator, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "He's starting the summit push a day early. Can you imagine the nerve? K2 without bottled oxygen. The sheer physical and mental strength that takes." She wasn't talking to me. She was talking at me, through me, to some idealized version of a listener who shared her fascination. She scrolled, her fingers dancing across the screen, pulling up photos, quoting his past posts about discipline and fear. She knew the details of this stranger's life, his training regimen, his diet, his favorite brand of gloves, with an intimacy that felt like a physical blow. I sat there, eating the food that now tasted like nothing, listening to her describe a man who conquered literal mountains for a living. And I thought about my own day, about the spreadsheets I had audited, the quarterly reports I had filed, the quiet, predictable order of my own life. The comparison wasn't spoken, but it screamed in the space between us, louder than any words. I waited. I waited for a natural pause that never came. The food grew cold on her plate as she swiped and narrated. Finally, I couldn't take the sound of her voice describing another person's life in my house, on our night. I put my fork down softly. I said, "It's our anniversary. Could the mountain wait? Just for an hour?" She looked up from the screen then. Her expression shifted from rapt attention to something else. First confusion, as if I had spoken in a foreign language, then a slow dawning pity. She took a deliberate sip of her wine, placed the glass down carefully, and smiled a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's be real," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, as if explaining something simple to a child. "You're just a placeholder. You're just here until someone with a real life, someone like him, comes along." The words didn't land with a shout or a slam. They were stated. A simple, accepted fact of the universe, like gravity or the time of sunset. She might as well have been commenting on the weather. A funny thing happened then. I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel my heart break. I felt a click. Deep inside my chest, it was like a heavy vault door sealed shut. All the love, the confusion, the years of trying, the slow burn of disappointment, they all got locked away in an instant. What rose to the surface was a terrifying calm. An analytical, quiet clarity. I simply nodded. I looked at my plate, picked up my fork, and finished my meal. I chewed slowly. I tasted every bland, overcooked bite. I drank my wine. I did not look at her. She seemed momentarily surprised by my reaction, then shrugged slightly and went back to her phone, her commentary now hushed, but no less enthusiastic. When I was done, I stood up. I cleared my plate. I cleared her untouched plate. I took them to the kitchen, rinsed them, and put them in the dishwasher. I moved methodically, my mind utterly silent. I was an automaton, executing a cleanup protocol. Later, lying in the dark beside her sleeping form, I didn't stare at the ceiling fighting tears. I felt like a forensic accountant brought in to audit a failed business. I took stock. The assets, my stability, my loyalty, my ability to provide a quiet, safe home. These had been on the books, but they had been severely undervalued, treated as liabilities of boredom. The liability, her contempt, her disinterest, her investment in a fantasy. That liability was now insurmountable. The business of our marriage was insolvent. The numbers didn't lie. The profit and loss statement showed years in the red. The emotional capital was gone. It was a clean, clinical realization devoid of pain. The pain was locked in the vault. All that was left was the problem to be solved. I got out of bed. The floor was cool under my feet. I walked to my home office, the neat, ordered space where I controlled variables for a living. I turned on the small desk lamp, its light a soft pool on the polished wood. I opened my laptop. I didn't open my work files. I opened a new, blank spreadsheet. At the top, in cell A1, I typed a title, Project Divorce. It wasn't a dramatic title. It was a project name like any other. Below it, I began to list headers. Assets, debts, timeline, legal considerations. Then, on a new tab, I created a different list. This one was not about us. It was about him. I titled that tab, James Thorne. I began to research. I found his foundation, his sponsorship deals, his public schedule. I learned about his newly launched environmental nonprofit. It was all very public, very heroic, very real. I zoomed in on a press release photo of him, this man with a windswept, rugged face and eyes that looked toward distant horizons. The man who had a real life. I felt nothing looking at him. No jealousy. No hatred. He was a variable. A data point. A key component in the equation that had just been presented to me. The final action of that night, as the first gray light of dawn touched the window, was me opening a new browser tab. I did not search for divorce lawyers. Not yet. Instead, I found the corporate donor page for James Thorne's foundation. I scrolled to the bottom, to a section titled Contact for Major Gifts.